Welcome to another Growth Masters Federal podcast. Growth Masters Federal is a nationwide community of growth-oriented government contractors, their owners and executive teams, and the professionals who support them. The purpose is to share experiences and discuss timely topics on planning and executing the most effective growth strategies in the complex, highly regulated, but opportunity-rich federal marketplace. Your host is Shirley Collier, President and founder of Scale to Market. Scale to Market helps businesses think, plan, collaborate, and prosper in the federal marketplace by developing and executing data-driven, customized business development playbooks. Today's discussion is on market intelligence, federal procurement data gathering and analysis. Shirley's guest today is Jamie Bratton, President and founder of Easygov Ops. Easygov Ops is a sophisticated yet affordable market research platform combining state-of-the-art data mining technologies with expert personalized research services and a custom client platform for developing and tracking your opportunity pipeline. And now here's your host, Shirley Collier. Enjoy the podcast.
My special guest today is Jamie Bratton, founder and CEO of Easygov Ops. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you, Shirley.
Before we discuss the role that data plays in the success of government contractors, tell our audience why you started Easygov Ops.
Easygov Ops has been in this space for about 11 years. We got into the market intelligence space because we saw a definitive void in a sense of affordable market intelligence. And quite frankly, to provide technology in ways that the other folks that are in the space are not providing. So in that kind of special light, kind of highlights analytics. There's so many different moving components and data strands that it's very difficult to kind of connect those dots. So with human intelligence, with raw data, kind of paint a different picture. Because of the fact that this space is always evolving with new programs coming out on a daily occasion, with the GWACs that are obviously in the space, schedules, it's a very complex space to be in. So we want to provide a competitive advantage with analytics and data.
What you didn't say, Jamie, is that you are considered an industry leader. You've taken on the 900-pound gorillas in this space, and you have leaped over them in terms of features and function for a very reasonable price. So I want to ask you some questions from that perspective.
Sure.
You are highly innovative and competitive in a very good way, which means that you have your finger on the pulse of federal procurement practices. So federal procurement practices have changed over the years. Mm-hmm. It used to be that all you needed was a GSA schedule.
Right.
So looking in your crystal ball, how do you envision these practices changing in the future?
Sure. The main challenge in this space, and this is a huge challenge for government contractors, is because the space is ever evolving in a sense of GSA taking a stronger foothold through their vehicles, through specialized GWACs, through GSA schedules. There's a huge transparency concern in a sense of, they're taking on more of the market share. Roughly about 10 years ago, they were about a quarter of the market share in a sense of all the opportunities. I'm talking about GSA specifically through the GWACs and schedules. Well, the whole vision of GSA is to actually take over more of a percentage. It'd be roughly about 2/3 is their target. They're still a long ways away from achieving that, but they're roughly about 35 to 40% of the market share now. So you can see a trend. So what's happening is that these one-time contracts that go out into procurement space, and the government, is obviously, understaffed and overworked in the sense of trying to find truly vetted candidates for these particular opportunities. So they're choosing easier means to be able to procure their needs. The GSA world is trying to develop certain programs to get possible candidates for those particular opportunities. Now, the challenge is, how do you know about these programs? And you have to be kind of in the information pipeline. GSA has a Twitter feed that you can actually see what's happening, get a finger on the pulse of their world. But how do you find out about these different vehicles? Well, schedules haven't changed too much since the dawn of time. There's about 41 schedules in the mix. Each one provides a kind of unique need for a skill set, to be part of that particular schedule. But some schedules, for example, Schedule 70, there's almost 4,000 vendors, qualified vendors on that schedule.
It's highly competitive.
Exactly. So 4,000 vendors in year one, how to compete with 4,000 people in one procurement opportunity. So there's a challenge in that world, but the cool thing about schedules is it's treated just like a GWAC, a government-wide acquisition vehicle, where you get on a particular schedule and any agency can be able to find you and still be able to procure their needs. But government contractors love the fact they can deal with one contracting officer be part of a pool of 7 candidates, not be part of 4,000. And statistically, their odds are obviously going to be much better. And it's a government-wide, exposure as opposed to one particular, particular agency. So, again, it's a checks and balances. You got to figure out what's best for you as a government contractor. How can that government agency, especially if you're focusing on one or several, find you and actually procure those particular goods through you or services through you?
So Jamie, you mentioned about the GSA having a GWAC, but there are other agencies, aren't there, that also have GWAC?
There is a GWAC called VETS, which is obviously good for the Veterans Administration. It's a vehicle and a means for the Veterans Administration to be able to procure their services or goods through that particular vehicle. The VETS vehicle, you have to be a SDVOSB. 99% go through that. They do have drips and drabs. About 1% go to VOSBs, Veteran and Small Businesses. But their primary focus is SDVOSBs, as it should be.
Yeah, service disabled.
Absolutely. And there's other GWACs that are very unique in stature. There's Alliant 1, there's Alliant 2, there's a small business segment, within those particular vehicles. Alliant 2, unfortunately, there's a lot of protests, happening right now. So with that being said, they're still trying to iron out the protests in the sense of the pool that's already been accepted.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest pet peeves in the procurement space is, unfortunately, in the last several years, there's been a tremendous amount of protests that the non-participants are throwing their arms up in the air. And it's putting a halt on those programs altogether.
What do you think is the basis of those protests?
Well, it's unfair practices in a myriad of different ways. Quite frankly, a lot of the protests are, if you look at percentages, they're the mid-sized to the larger tier folks that are doing the protests because they're not getting their lion's share of what they've been accustomed to. So, the pretense was it was small business, that felt that they were slighted. It's actually the opposite because of contracting dollars are being shrunk tremendous amount of volume. That these mid-tier and large tier that have big benches, they have a tremendous mouth to feed. That these folks are struggling, so they're doing everything they can to make sure they can still maintain the contracted dollars they have been accustomed to in the past.
Yeah, I want to go back to the fact that the government is moving more towards GWACs, IDIQs, and BPAs. Most of my clients complain legitimately that finding out information on GWACs, like when they compete, when do they conduct on-ramps for small businesses, or the task areas and requirements to prime. How do you suggest that they go about finding this critical information?
That's probably the best question of the day, Shirley. The challenges are many. There's not a lot of exposure communication-wise. You have to be part of the particular on-ramp scenarios, attend industry day events, which is essential for some of these big on-ramps and some of these big programs that are out there in the space. The biggest challenge is I'll give an example, CIO SP3.
Yeah.
It's a big program. There's no transparency. It's a lockdown platform. It's called EGOS, EGOS. And in that, we don't even have access. Market intelligence solutions, any entity doesn't have access to particular procurement solicitations. The contracts themselves that are reported, yes, we have access to that.
That's after the fact.
That's after the fact. And not only that, the challenge is that what took place. The reported contracts, which come from, and I'm sure we'll expand upon this in a later question. The reported contracts all come from FPDS. The challenge is that particular data source, which is the only entity that's out there that the government uses to kind of relay this information, it's not really detailed enough in a sense of the transaction. So these task orders that come out, there'll be a paragraph, there might be a sentence, there might be 3 words in the sense of a total description. So the challenges are many as to when you try to track these and try to find these and try to find task orders, which are like mini contracts within these particular programs.
If you're not a contract holder.
Absolutely. And how do you find out about these?
Yes.
And that's where we come into play, where you quite frankly, you have to have market intelligence.
Yeah.
If you are competing in the higher realm, of government contracting, as a government contractor, and you want to go after these IDIQs and you're on a particular vehicle and you're not winning task orders, you must know who is winning those task orders, why are they winning those task orders. You already have a contact, and simply reach out to those folks and say, listen, I'm fully qualified, fully vetted. You've already approved me as a vendor in this particular vehicle. How do you know that I'm fully qualified for this particular task? and when that task order actually ends, to make sure that I get equal footing for that task order within that vehicle. So the challenges are many, but that's a great question.
So most government contractors seek both prime and subcontracting opportunities. So how does a government contractor with subcontracting ambitions find the perfect prime partner?
It's a great question. And the challenges are many in a sense of a government contractor as to where should they have their focus. Obviously, if you haven't won any prime contracts, you should focus on the sub world, at first. You get some, obviously, contract history, develop a rapport with the primes. And quite simply, that takes a while. Typically, a lot of the mid-tier to higher tier, primes have small business, teams that you'll have to deal with them. And you'll feel like one of, 1,000. Participants. So it's kind of hard to stand out. You have to obviously provide some kind of distinct advantage for you as a government contractor, whether it's what we call disruptive technology. That will obviously give you a competitive advantage, not only from partnering with a prime, but obviously trying to win a prime contract for a particular agency. But most contractors should have a subcontract ambition as well as a prime contract ambition. If they're starting out, the focus should be subcontract, endeavors. How to find the primes? Finding company data is an extreme challenge for small business. Company data comes from a myriad of different sources. There's SAM.gov, and that basically gives you the grassroots. Who are the main contacts, first name, last name, email addresses. Very basic information about government contracts. It doesn't tell you how they're performing. It doesn't tell you what prime contracts they won. Their history from the subcontract scene. So there's a myriad of different sources that you have to actually tap into. And that, requires a lot of bandwidth. They don't have the availability, quite simply, because they're wearing the accounting hat, the payroll hat, human resources hat, staffing hat, or hats, I should say. The challenges are many trying to find that particular intel. So the government actually has procurement sites or actual, websites to garner bits and pieces or data strands. What we do is we try to combine all those data strands together, which is a huge challenge on our part, but it's pretty magical to actually see that happen. So SAM.gov is one source. USAspending.gov is a subcontracting source. They're also a prime source, but all subcontracted data when it's reported. Now I'm putting emphasis on when. Mid-tier and large tier report. Small tier government contractors are not obligated to report. Mid-tier are requested to report. Large primes typically are obligated to report. So there's a challenge. It's not 100% of the pie, but we garner in what we produce all that intel on, and as to who's winning those subcontracts. So to answer your question fully, how do I, as a contractor, find primes that are winning subcontracts? You can find that in USAspending.gov, but it doesn't give all the connecting of the dots of what that company is all about. It talks about the subcontracts that they awarded, but it doesn't go into the meat of what the prime is, who are the prime contacts within that particular company. So again, that touches on the challenge, all those data strands, all these different sources.
And I always advise my clients to gather as much data as they possibly can before they approach a potential prime contractor.
Absolutely.
So they are prepared, they understand the history of the contracts that have been won by that prime.
Absolutely.
And the contracts that are coming up for recompete, so they can talk about maybe jumping on a team when the contract comes up for recompete. And I know they all struggle with that. And of course, the consistent theme with all of my clients is that they want to grow rapidly.
Absolutely.
They don't want to take 10 years to get there. They want to get there in 2 years.
Today's podcast on market intelligence is brought to you by Scale to Market, helping businesses thrive and grow in the federal marketplace by developing and executing data-driven, customized business development playbooks. Shirley Collier is your host, and our guest today is Jamie Bratton of Easygov Ops. Now back to the podcast.
So Jamie, what do you think are the most important factors that lead to rapid success in the federal space?
That's always going to be a challenge. For small business specifically, they got to have subcontracting, goals, within the mindset as to how do I achieve a faster track to win subcontracts, because they need money, they need revenue. So that would be the first avenue to be able to start developing relationships with certain primes look for primes that have locales close to them. Okay, there's nothing going to trump a relationship that you have a one-on-one, with a particular prime. So look for companies geographically close to you. Look for companies that are on particular vehicles that basically are just starting out, or they have a history of being on the first generation of those particular vehicles that you can assist on. You have the same kind of mission goals and kind of in alignment with that prime. You got to develop a rapport, in a short track of time, because developing a relationship with a particular prime takes forever. So start now, start early in developing that. A new contractor looking for prime contracting opportunities, the philosophy is you have to have past contract history as a prime is totally true. Now, there's certification processes you can get underway. You can obviously go through the 8A program, 9-year program, the financially set program for small business. You can, if you're a veteran, obviously be VOSB certified. SDVOSB, obviously if you represent the military within our country. There's Hub Zone. There's all these different entities, what we call set aside distinctions that will provide an advantage for you. So you have to start early. Those don't just happen overnight to get those certifications approved. The 8A program typically takes about a year. You can fast track that. There are services out there that will help you. You have to pay for them, unfortunately. That'll fast track you to get you on those particular set aside distinctions in about 6 months or so. But to get on a schedule, we were talking about GSA schedules earlier, it takes about a year. And it's almost impossible to fast track that. There's services out there that provide that fast track, but you could be paying $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for those services. And again, as a small business, you don't have $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. Again, with all purpose of thought, how can I succeed? And you're formalizing your company. You're obviously hiring folks to obviously get you on the way. The challenges are many in the sense of small business to be able to thrive. But if you work with the premise of developing relationships early, finding primes local to you, try to find prime contracts that are small in nature. 2.5 million or less typically would be the emphasis in the sense of targeting.
If you want to prime them yourself.
Absolutely.
Yes.
If you want to prime, exactly. If you want to prime, and the certifications, I can't put enough emphasis on the certifications. If you have those certs in play, that will actually help you with no past contract history to actually get in play if you're looking at small contracts. Yeah. Once you get one under your belt, it's amazingly easy from that point forward to actually land other prime contracts. Again,
now you have past performance.
Absolutely. Small in nature. Again, it's like taking a little chunk of the pie and just taking another big nibble and just moving forward.
So you've mentioned a couple of things that I think are important. One is that you have to have a value proposition. Second is that you have to develop relationships with people. Third is that if you qualify, you need to get on some programs, socioeconomic certification programs. So let's say that I'm a business and I've done all three of those things, but now, I have very limited resources. So how do I know which opportunities I should be focusing on? Because there are literally hundreds and hundreds of potential contracts and contract vehicles.
Absolutely.
How do I sort through all of that?
It's always going to be a challenge. In this space, like I said, knowing that GSA is trying to take a larger market share of the space and the lack of transparency, the challenges are always going to be many, especially moving forward. So there's obviously events that you can go to, industry day events, specifically that government contracting officers actually put on, representing their agencies. There's different periodicals you can subscribe to without giving too much credence on these different sources, but GovCon Wire, Washington Technology, we subscribe to all these different periodicals. We're kind of periodical crazy in the sense of trying to gather this intel. But these particular periodicals have their ears to the ground as to what's moving and shaking. We tap into these. We provide first generation, kind of overviews, because a lot of these programs, they just didn't reinvent themselves, magically for the first generation. They've been in existence, and they'll come out with generation number 2, generation number 3, and they'll expound upon that. And they'll focus on different task areas and so forth for the newer generations. But you have to subscribe or at least have access to a lot of these periodicals. That's quite simply what our researchers do internally within my company. On average, and this is a really good statistic, about 40 IDIQs come out every single day on average.
Wow.
Within those 40 IDIQs, some of them might be second generation, third generation, and so forth. Some of them might be Onramps for future big programs. And the challenge is, how do you find out that they are an Onramp or they are an IDIQ. Well, there's ways you can obviously do a keyword search, IDIQ and FBO in that particular search, but it will give you no intel in a sense of the first generation. Who are the players? Knowledge is power in this particular space. You have to know who the players are on the prior generation of that particular program that's new and upcoming. So, and who were the favorites in that previous award? If there was 8 players and 7 of them were major participants, 1 unfortunately didn't win any task orders. You need to know that. So the bottom line is again, knowledge is power. Periodicals really help us, internally, for that intel.
Yep. So I want to elaborate a little bit on that intel. How do contractors find out not only which agencies are buying what they're selling, but the people within those agencies that they should be talking to?
Great question. The biggest avenue besides the periodicals that we tap into is we look at the forecast. The forecast for each agency is publicized for the most part. I would say 95% of the agencies actually go through channels to publicize them. The other 5%, like DISA, for example, you have to turn 42 rocks to be able to find it. It's unfortunate, but it's just the way it is. Within these agency forecasts, they talk about the upcoming year. Unfortunately, some of the forecasts come out staggered. They don't come out obviously when the new fiscal year actually starts. They'll be staggered typically 6 months thereafter into the actual year of the forecast. They're actually trying to promote, which is insanity, which I still can't quite figure that out. So, for example, if the government starts their government year October 1 and it runs to September 30th every year, some agencies don't release their forecast till January, February of the following year.
I've seen them as late as April.
Absolutely. April, quite simply, this is one of them that comes out in April. So how do you find out, for the following year forecast when there's a 6-month stagger, situation as to what's moving and shaking? So these unique programs, unique IDIQs are coming out into play. But still tap into it because, as I shared earlier, there's delays, there's protests. So even though the government's premise of thought is that these are going to release in that that year, they most likely will be pushed back a little bit. So if you get ahead of the curve, know about these particular contracts way in advance. These particular vehicles that they're specifically targeting. Position yourselves to actually look for the Onramps to some of these programs that you see as the best fit for you. You've got to do that in advance.
And the data on the people to contact is also in there.
Absolutely. The first name, last name, email addresses are in their forecast. Typically, most agencies will do an Excel file extract that you can tap into, so you can sort, filter, go crazy. Some agencies are very archaic. They'll have Word documents and PDFs, which you can't filter. It's a bloody nightmare.
Exactly. Very well.
So some of those, will be a challenge, but the bottom line is that there are resources out there to tap into that. You have to just, Google, certain keywords to be able to find them and track them.
Yeah. So, Jamie, a common mistake that I see small businesses make is to be unaware of their competitors. So, what is the best source of data on incumbents, likely competitors, and potential teaming partners?
One avenue, FBO does allow interested vendors to be able to publicize their interests. Now, most folks that advertise are extremely small business. They've never won a prime contract, ever. And most of them have never won a subcontract. They're doing it for exposure because with the pretense that somebody else is going to win that particular opportunity and that they know about them and that they can actually vet them and check them out. Okay. Yeah. Now, in a sense of data about the companies, we talked about SAM.gov as one source. FPDS, when task orders take place, and this is very unique, when FPDS.gov actually produces contract confirmed data about that activity or task orders and so forth. When those task orders are issued, prior to that, that company that is actually won that particular task order, that information, because of the contractual agreement, with the agency and the KO or the contracting officer, they have to report their latest revenue, how many employees that they actually have. So we actually tap into that for every task order activity. Now, unique scenario within what we do, and this is very unique, is that we take the latest task order activity. The latest task order activity is updated within the company profile, and that way you have the latest information about that company. It's always going to be a challenge, Shirley, in the sense of trying to get the latest information about a particular company.
So, Jamie, this question is not about market intelligence, but about you as a CEO and an entrepreneur. What advice would you give to the 21-year-old Jamie?
get more sleep. This space is, like I said, it's ever evolving because you're dealing with so many different government agencies and their forecasts and the dynamic situation of customers that have retired colonels and generals running their companies that have very high needs of specialized intel about these certain programs, and you always have to stay in the know.
Yeah.
So the challenge is that you have to have a big bench to get all this information disseminated through it.
Yep.
Yes, and the challenges are many in the sense of how can I pull all these different data sources, compile everything together, paint a big picture, and then have all these moving components. Like for example, data feeds are coming in that happened this morning, 2, 4, 3, 4, 5 o'clock, this morning, of new opportunities. That could be 2,000 opportunities that hit the space just this morning.
Yeah.
And some of these opportunities are going to be big in nature. Some of these are going to be, building a fence in Des Moines, Iowa. Nobody really cares. But, some of these are very, very important. And then how can you get this information out to the masses?
Yeah.
And that's always a challenge in the sense of, all these moving components.
So, Jamie, it's time to wrap up. Thank you so much for your insights today. Folks, to get in touch with Jamie or to review the Easygov Ops software, go to easygovops.com. That is easygovopps.com. This is Shirley Collier signing off for now.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on how to grow your business in the federal marketplace, visit our website at scale2market.com. That's scale2market.com, and subscribe to the Growth Masters Federal channel on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Join us again soon, and have a great day.